Henry VIII was born in 1491, not as the golden boy of England, but as the spare. His older brother Arthur was the chosen one, raised to rule, married to Catherine of Aragon, and already being groomed as the next king. Henry, he was tucked away at Eltham Palace, raised by servants, religious tutors, and grandmother, Lady Margaret Beaufort, who ran his childhood like a medieval boot camp. According to Alison Weir, Henry's early years were rigorously structured, filled with Latin, etiquette, and sermons. He wasn't allowed a household of his own. He rarely saw his father. Even his letters were screened. He wasn't being raised to rule. He was being trained to obey. But then, in 1502, Arthur died. At just 10 years old, Henry suddenly became the heir to the throne. You'd think this would change everything. But nope. His father, Henry VII, doubled down. Henry still wasn't trusted with any actual power. Weir writes that the king rarely let his son appear at court, and only used him as a ceremonial ornament. This lack of trust scarred Henry deeply. There's a recorded incident where Henry VII reportedly shouted at his son so harshly that courtiers feared for his safety. So while Henry was learning music, theology, and jousting, he was also quietly building a mountain of resentment. By 1509, when Henry VII died, Henry VIII was 17 years old. He had no political training, no real allies, and a lifetime of emotional suppression dressed up in silk. He inherited a powerful kingdom with zero preparation, unless you count obsessive hygiene, a love for pageantry, and deeply buried anger issues. And that, folks, is how a people-pleasing choir boy got handed a crown and slowly turned into a tyrant. Henry VIII became king at 17, and England lost its mind. After the cold, tax-hoarding reign of Henry VII, young Henry was a dream. Handsome, tall, athletic, and ready to cancel half his father's policies just to win public applause. He threw open the palace doors, executed his dad's least favorite advisors, and married Catherine of Aragon in a flashy power move that screamed, "Let's start the Renaissance." According to Alison Weir, people saw him as the second coming of King Arthur, with better calves. He loved music, spoke fluent Latin, and could joust like a warrior poet. His court turned into a non-stop performance: pageants, masks, feasts, and flirtation. Every event was curated to remind England that its king wasn't just powerful, he was perfect. But here's the catch: it was all a show. Beneath the velvet and trumpets, Henry still had no clue how to govern. So he outsourced that part to Cardinal Wolsey, a political genius in red robes who basically ran the country while Henry played tennis. And why not? Henry didn't want spreadsheets. He wanted armor, art, and applause. Meanwhile, Catherine was already struggling to produce an heir, and Henry, despite all his partying, couldn't ignore the fact that he still had no son. By 1515, the golden boy routine was starting to crack. He still looked the part, but pressure was building from the church, from the nobility, and from his own bloodline. And as Weir hints, it wasn't just a matter of time before the golden crown got heavy. It was already starting to slip, because when your image is everything, the first wrinkle is a crisis, and Henry was headed for a royal breakdown. By 1515, Henry VIII had everything: power, pageantry, and a closet full of gold-threaded codpieces. But the one thing he didn't have? A clue how to run a kingdom. So he handed the steering wheel to Cardinal Wolsey, a self-made genius in velvet, who practically ruled England while Henry rehearsed for jousts and costume dramas. Weir paints Wolsey as the ultimate survivor, brilliant, charming, and sneakier than a court jester with a dagger. Henry didn't mind. While Wolsey ran foreign policy and parliament, Henry hosted 6-hour banquets, danced in disguises, and cosplayed as Hercules in court masks. But behind the glitter was a storm of court politics. Nobles hated Wolsey, seeing him as an arrogant upstart. Factions formed like knife-wielding fan clubs: pro-Catherine, anti-Wolsey, pro-ambition. Every smile at court had a dagger behind it. Meanwhile, Catherine of Aragon's womb was letting Henry down. She had miscarriage after miscarriage, and Henry, ever the theologian when it suited him, started whispering that maybe God didn't like their marriage. That Leviticus verse? The one about not marrying your brother's widow? Yeah, it suddenly started haunting him, right around the time Anne Boleyn entered the scene. Weir hints that Henry wasn't just insecure. He was watching, testing, learning. He let Wolsey wear the crown in all but name, then quietly resented him for it. And while Wolsey thought he was untouchable, Henry was already building a trap. A king who let others rule was no king at all. And Henry was done being the side character in his own reign. Because when your advisors get too comfortable and your nobles start smiling too much, there's only one way to fix it: heads roll. And spoiler, Wolsey's head was next in line. By 1527, Henry VIII had a problem, one that couldn't be solved with a sword or a feast. He'd been married to Catherine of Aragon for nearly 2 decades and still had no male heir. just one daughter, Mary, and a creeping sense that maybe God wasn't a fan of incestuous dynasties. Suddenly, Henry remembered a Bible verse about how marrying your brother's widow was cursed. Convenient timing, especially since Anne Boleyn had just arrived, and unlike Catherine, she didn't come with royal baggage. She came with cheekbones, charm, and a strict no sleeping with the king policy. Anne played Henry like a lute. She made him beg, flatter, and grovel in love letters. Weir notes that he was obsessed, signing notes as your loyal servant and wearing her colors in tournaments. Meanwhile, Henry tried to strong-arm the Pope into granting a divorce, but there was one tiny problem. The Pope was being held hostage by Charles Fath, who just so happened to be Catherine's nephew. So, yeah, awkward. When Rome said no, Henry threw a tantrum that changed history. He declared the Pope irrelevant, made himself head of the Church of England, and basically told the Vatican to kiss his crown. Anne got a secret wedding, Catherine got booted from court, and Thomas More, Henry's bestie, got executed for refusing to play along. This wasn't just a divorce, it was a meltdown with legal paperwork. Henry rewired an entire religion, chopped heads, and declared himself God's favorite king, all because his marriage felt like a dead end. And spoiler alert, Anne didn't give him a son either, but that's a problem for the next episode. For now, England had a brand new church, a brand new queen, and a king who just rewritten the rules to win a girlfriend. By 1533, Henry VIII had it all: his own church, a new wife, and a royal ego the size of Westminster Abbey. Anne Boleyn was finally queen, but the fairy tale ended faster than you can say male heir. She gave birth to Elizabeth, not Edward, and that meant strike one. Then came the miscarriages, the gossip, and Henry's growing suspicion that Anne wasn't just unlucky, she might be cursed, or worse, disloyal. According to Weir, Henry's affection flipped to disgust so fast it gave the entire court whiplash. So he did what any reasonable monarch would do: accused her of adultery, incest, and treason, then had her executed with a foreign swordsman for a cleaner cut. 11 days later, he married Jane Seymour. She gave him a son, finally, but died 2 weeks later. Henry actually mourned this one, mostly because she died before disappointing him. Then came Anne of Cleves, who looked nothing like her portrait. Henry took one glance, yelled, "I like her not," and had the marriage annulled in under 6 months. She got a nice estate. He got out of kissing her. Win-win. Next, Catherine Howard, young, pretty, and way too flirty. Turns out she'd been sleeping around before and possibly during the marriage. Beheaded at 18. Just another chapter in Henry's bedtime horror stories. By now, Henry was tired, wounded, basically, and way past the golden boy years. Weir notes his tyranny escalated. Friends became enemies. Advisors disappeared. Executions were scheduled like dinner parties. The king who once wrote poetry now ruled by fear, and yet he still thought the problem was everyone else. Because when your wives keep dying, your friends keep betraying you, and your enemies are mostly imaginary, maybe the guy in the mirror isn't the hero. Maybe he's the executioner. By 1542, Henry VIII wasn't a king. He was a cautionary tale, wrapped in velvet and pus. The once handsome golden boy now weighed over 400 pounds, had a leg ulcer that oozed like a cursed stew, and needed to be hoisted onto his horse with a winch. According to Alison Weir, the stench from his infected leg was so bad that courtiers gagged while bowing. If power corrupts, then absolute power also smells awful. Physically broken, Henry's mind didn't fare much better. He spiraled into rage fits, paranoid episodes, and impulsive executions. Old friends became suspicious elements. Noblemen were dragged to the block for coat of arms designs. Even his last wife, Catherine Parr, clever, educated, and calm, barely escaped death after daring to debate religion with him. She survived only by pretending to be a silly little woman who had no business talking theology. Genius move. At this point, Henry was practically a ghost, ruling from behind silk curtains. He signed laws with a stamp, avoided public appearances, and let his advisors fight over who'd rule when he died. He tried to manage his legacy, but the reality was worse than any prophecy. His long-dreamed tomb was never built. His body, bloated and decomposing, burst inside his coffin. Dogs allegedly licked up the mess. He died in 1547, surrounded by silence and fear. Not exactly how you picture the death of a man who changed the face of Europe. And while he left behind a son, a broken church, and a lot of dead people, the truth was clear. The crown didn't make Henry great. It made him dangerous. And by the end, even the crown wanted nothing to do with him.